I never thought I'd hear those words. Not from him. Get out of my life, Ryan yelled, his voice sharp, trembling, echoing through the walls that once held our laughter. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway of his room, clutching the laundry basket I'd brought in. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my chest might crack. I tried to convince myself I misheard him, that maybe he was just angry, frustrated, but no. His face told the truth. The anger in his eyes wasn't just a spark, it was a fire that had been burning for a long time. Ryan, I whispered, my voice shaking, what did you just say? He turned away, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, Mom. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't need you controlling everything. Just get out. Controlling, that word stung. After everything, the late nights I stayed awake waiting for him to come home, the 2 jobs I worked to pay his college tuition, the birthdays I celebrated alone while he drifted further away. Controlling was what he thought of me, that I wanted to scream back, to remind him who was there when his father died, who held him through every nightmare, who sacrificed everything just to see him smile again. But the words froze in my throat. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like home. He turned his back to me. Please, just leave, he said, quieter now, but firmer. Something inside me broke, quietly, invisibly, like glass under a soft footstep. I set the basket down by the door, my hands trembling. I wanted to reach out and touch his shoulder, to remind him I was still his mother, but I didn't. Instead, I walked out of his room, out of the house, and into the cold night air. The wind hit my face, sharp and biting, as if the world itself was scolding me. I got into my car and sat there, staring at the front door, hoping he'd come out, apologize, call me back inside. But the lights went off one by one. He wasn't coming. I rested my head on the steering wheel, tears spilling onto my lap. Somewhere deep down, I whispered, what happened to us, Ryan? And though no one could hear me, I knew my heart had just lost something it might never get back. But I didn't know then that this wasn't the end of our story. It was the painful beginning of something neither of us expected. I didn't drive far that night. Just a few blocks away, I pulled into my sister's driveway. The headlights of my car brushed across her front porch, and before I could even knock, she opened the door. Anna, she said softly, her brows pulling together. One look at my tear-stained face, and she didn't need another word. She pulled me into her arms. The warmth of her embrace undoing the composure I'd been clinging to. He told me to get out of his life, I whispered against her shoulder, the words tasting bitter and unreal. She didn't say, I told you so. She just led me inside, sat me on her couch, and handed me a cup of tea. The house smelled like cinnamon and calm, the opposite of what I'd just left behind. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I stared at the steam rising from my cup, thinking of Ryan's face, the frustration, the exhaustion, the anger. He wasn't a bad kid. He'd never been, but lately, he'd become someone I didn't recognize. It started small, I said finally, breaking the silence. He stopped coming home for dinner. Then, he started hiding things, his phone, his plans, his moods. Every time I asked, he'd roll his eyes, say I was overreacting. My sister nodded slowly. He's growing up, Anna. Maybe he just needs space. Space, that word again. Everyone kept saying it as if it were the magic solution to heartbreak. But space was what had created this distance in the first place. I sighed. I lost his father when he was 10. I promised myself I'd protect him from everything, even from the kind of loneliness that broke me. Maybe I held on too tight. Her hand found mine. You loved him. That's never wrong. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think love was enough. But as I sat there in that quiet room, surrounded by memories of family dinners and laughter, I realized something painful. Sometimes, love isn't enough when it forgets to let go. That night, I decided not to call him, not to text, not to beg him to talk. Instead, I'd give him what he asked for, space. But I'd also give him what he didn't know he needed. Time to see who really stood by him when everyone else walked away. As I lay on my sister's guest bed, staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the dark, where did I go wrong? But deep down, I already knew the answer. I hadn't gone wrong loving him. I'd just forgotten that sometimes love has to stand at the door and wait to be let back in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional true life stories like this one. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reminds us all that every heartbreak can still find its way home. 2 weeks, That's how long it had been since I last heard my son's voice. 2 weeks of silence that felt heavier than any argument, any slammed door, any angry word. Every morning, I'd wake up with my phone beside me, hoping for a message, even a single word like hi. Every night, I'd check his social media, just to see if he was okay. I told myself I wasn't being obsessive, just a mother worrying from afar. But the truth, I was breaking inside. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned, cooked, watered plants that didn't need watering, but the quiet followed me everywhere. The clinking of dishes sounded louder. The ticking of the clock reminded me that time was passing, and I was still waiting. One afternoon, I decided to drive past the old house. I told myself it was just coincidence that I happened to be in the neighborhood, but who was I fooling? When I parked across the street, I saw his car in the driveway. The curtains were drawn, and I couldn't see inside, but just knowing he was there made my heart twist. For a second, I imagined knocking on the door, maybe even apologizing for things I didn't do. But then, I remembered his voice echoing in my mind. Get out of my life. So I stayed in the car. I watched from a distance, like a stranger looking into her own story. When I got back to my sister's place, I went through an old box I'd brought with me, memories I hadn't touched in years. Inside were Ryan's childhood drawings, birthday cards, and old photos. One paper caught my eye, a crayon drawing of me and him holding hands, standing under a crooked sun. Above it, in shaky letters, he'd written, "Mom is my hero." I stared at it for a long time. That little boy, where had he gone? When did life become so complicated? When did I stop being his hero? That night, I sat by the window, clutching that paper like it could somehow take me back to simpler days, and that's when something shifted inside me. A quiet, steady realization. If I wanted to reach my son again, I couldn't do it through guilt or tears. I had to let him see me differently, not as the mother who smothered him, but as the woman who raised him, loved him, and was willing to understand him. So, I decided to do something I'd never done before, something that terrified me. Tomorrow, I'd write him a letter. Not to plead, not to lecture, but to tell him the truth about his father, about me, and about the love that never left, even when he did. The next morning, I sat at my sister's kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I hadn't written a letter in years, not since Mark passed away. At first, I didn't know where to begin. How do you speak to your own child when words have already broken everything? How do you reach a heart that's shut its doors to you? I took a deep breath and started anyway. Dear Ryan, I know you don't want to hear from me right now, but there are things a mother's heart can't keep quiet forever. You said you don't need me anymore. And maybe that's true, but I still need you, not to complete my life, but to know that I raised you into the man your father always hoped you'd become. I paused, blinking away tears that blurred the ink. I wasn't always strong, Ryan. After your father's accident, I didn't just lose him, I lost a part of myself too. I tried to fill that emptiness by holding on to you, maybe too tightly. I thought if I could protect you from pain, I could make our lives mean something again. But love doesn't work that way. I see that now. My hands trembled as I wrote the next lines. I never meant to control you. I was just scared that if I let go, I'd lose the only person left who still called me mom. But I know you need space to live, to make your own choices, even to make mistakes. I just hope you'll remember one thing. No matter how far you go, my love will always walk beside you. When I finished, I folded the letter and stared at it for a long time. Should I send it, or would it just reopen the wound? Part of me wanted to tear it up, to pretend I'd moved on, but another part, the mother in me whispered, he needs to know. So I slipped it into an envelope, wrote his name on it, and drove to the house. My hands were shaking as I placed the letter in the mailbox. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't want to see his face filled with anger again. I just left it there, a quiet piece of my heart sealed in paper and ink. As I drove away, I felt strangely calm. Maybe he wouldn't read it. Maybe he'd throw it away. But at least I'd said what I'd been carrying for years. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, unaware that by the next morning, everything was about to change. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us that love, even when broken, always finds a way back home. The morning after I dropped off the letter, I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight peeked through the curtains, soft and golden, like it was trying to whisper that maybe today would be different. But as the hours passed, the silence returned, the same heavy, empty silence I'd learned to live with. I told myself not to expect anything. Maybe Ryan wouldn't even check the mailbox. Maybe he'd see my handwriting and toss it without reading. I'd promised myself I wouldn't hope, but hope, it seems, doesn't listen. By evening, I tried to distract myself with small things. I baked cookies, his favorite chocolate chip ones, even though there was no one to eat them. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a fleeting second, it almost felt like home again. I sat on the couch, wrapping them in foil, when suddenly, a knock. It was soft, hesitant, but it was there. My heart jumped. For a moment, I froze. My mind ran wild. Could it be him? No, I told myself. Don't be foolish. But my hands were already trembling as I walked to the door. When I opened it, the world went still. Ryan stood there. His eyes were red, his hair messy, and in his hand was the letter, folded, creased, like he'd been holding it for hours. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, memorizing every line of his face, the same face I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. He swallowed hard. I read your letter." His voice cracked on the word letter. Tears blurred my vision. "You did?" He nodded, looking down. "I didn't know about Dad, about how much you went through. I thought you were just angry all the time." I shook my head. "I wasn't angry, Ryan. I was afraid. Losing your father broke something in me. I thought if I could keep you close, I wouldn't lose everything." He looked up then, and for the first time in months, I saw the little boy I used to know, the one who once held my hand and called me his hero. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for what I said, for everything." I reached out and touched his cheek, gently, like I was afraid he'd disappear. "You don't have to be sorry. You just have to come home." He smiled, a small, tired, but real smile. "Can I?" And that's when the tears I'd been holding back finally came. I nodded. "You never stopped belonging here, Ryan." That night, we didn't talk much. We didn't need to. He sat at the table, eating cookies while I made tea. And for the first time in a long, long time, my home didn't feel empty anymore. That night, after Ryan came home, the house felt alive again. The air seemed warmer, the silence softer. We didn't talk much at first. Sometimes, healing begins in quiet moments, not words. He stayed the night in his old room. I heard him moving around, maybe looking at the old posters still on the wall, or the photos on the shelf I'd never taken down. I wanted to knock, to sit beside him, but I decided to wait. I'd done enough pushing. The next morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. My coffee mug was beside him, the one that said "World's Best Mom," the one he'd given me when he was 8. He looked up and said softly, "I read your letter again last night." Then, after a pause, "You said you were scared after Dad's accident." I never really knew what happened that day. I froze. It had been years since anyone said that word, accident. For a long time, I thought I was protecting him by staying silent, but maybe silence had caused more harm than truth ever could. I sat down. "Ryan," I began, my voice barely a whisper, "your father didn't just die in that crash. He was coming home from a second job. He'd taken it secretly to help pay for your school. I told him we'd manage, but he wanted to give you everything." Ryan's eyes widened. "He never told me that." I shook my head. "He didn't tell anyone." He was exhausted that night, fell asleep at the wheel. I blamed myself for years for not stopping him, for not seeing how much he was pushing himself. Tears filled his eyes. "You've carried that alone all this time." I nodded, "And I carried you even tighter because I couldn't bear to lose what I had left of him. Every time I looked at you, I saw him, his eyes, his stubbornness, his dreams. I thought if I could protect you, maybe I could save a part of him too." Ryan leaned forward, taking my hands in his. "Mom, you didn't fail. You saved me, even when I didn't see it." The tears I'd been holding finally spilled. I laughed softly through them. "You sound just like your father." We sat there in silence, holding hands, letting years of misunderstanding dissolve between us. Outside, the morning sun streamed through the window, lighting up the table, the same table where we used to eat dinner as a family. That day, I realized something. Love doesn't protect by holding on. It protects by trusting. And for the first time in years, I trusted that my son would be okay. Not because I was guiding him, but because he'd finally learned where he came from. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us, sometimes, love's truest form is letting go and believing it'll find its way back. The days after our talk felt different, quieter. but in a peaceful way this time. The tension that once lived between us had softened. We didn't need to say much. Sometimes a shared silence can heal more than 1,000 apologies. Ryan stayed for a few days. Every morning, he'd sit at the kitchen table with his coffee, and I'd find myself smiling at the sound of his footsteps again. He even helped me fix the old porch light, the one his father had installed years ago. As we worked side by side, I caught him glancing at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, not as a strict mother, but as a woman who'd lived and loved deeply. One afternoon, I was sorting through an old box of his father's things when Ryan came over. Inside, he found a small envelope, yellowed at the edges, with his name written in his father's handwriting. I froze. I'd forgotten all about that letter. Mark had written it just weeks before the accident. I'd kept it hidden, waiting for the right time to give it to Ryan, but that right time never came. Until now. Ryan looked at me. "Can I open it?" My throat tightened. "It's yours," I whispered. He unfolded the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. His voice trembled as he read aloud. "My dear son, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you something important. Life will never be easy, but always remember, your mother is stronger than she seems. Take care of her the way she's always taken care of you. You're my greatest pride, Ryan. Be the man she can lean on." When he finished, neither of us spoke. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and I felt my heart ache and heal at the same time. He turned to me, his voice breaking. "I used to think you wanted to control everything, Mom, but now I understand. You were just trying to hold us together." I smiled through my tears. "Your father would be proud of you, Ryan." He shook his head gently. "No, Mom, I'm proud of you, for surviving, for never giving up on me." We sat there, holding the letter between us like a bridge, one that connected the past we'd lost to the future we could finally build together. That night, as he hugged me before bed, he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I pushed you away." And for the first time in years, my heart felt light. I realized that love doesn't need to be loud to be heard sometimes. It speaks in forgiveness, in truth, and in quiet understanding. Everything finally made sense. The morning after everything finally started to feel right, Ryan and I sat together on the porch. The sunlight spilled across the garden, glinting off the flowers I hadn't tended properly for months. He sipped his coffee slowly, and I watched him with a mix of relief and disbelief. It had been a long journey to get here, weeks of silence, anger, and misunderstanding, but somehow, we had reached a point where words weren't always necessary. His presence alone was enough to remind me that love had a way of coming back when you least expected it. He turned to me, a small smile playing on his lips. "Mom," he said softly, "I think I finally understand you. And Dad, too." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It wasn't easy for either of us," I admitted. "I wanted to protect you, but I know now that protecting doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go, and trusting that the bond will bring you back." Ryan looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me with a seriousness that made my heart ache. "I want us to be honest with each other from now on. No secrets, no walls, no yelling. I don't want to lose you again, and I don't want you to feel like you're losing me." I reached for his hand and squeezed it tightly. "I don't want that either," I whispered, "and I promise I'll try not to control, not to smother, just to be here, always." We sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, listening to the birds and the faint hum of the neighborhood waking up. For the first time in a long time, the past didn't feel like a weight. Instead, it felt like a bridge, a reminder of where we had been, and the promise of where we could go together. Later that day, we went through old photo albums and letters. We laughed at silly memories and cried at bittersweet ones. Every page, every photograph reminded us that life wasn't perfect, but love, real love, was stronger than any fight, any misunderstanding, or any silence. Before he left for the evening, Ryan hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Ma, for never giving up," he said. "I don't know if I would have come back without your letter, without your patience." I hugged him back, my tears falling freely now. "I never stopped loving you," I whispered, "and I never will. Promise me you'll always remember that." He nodded. "I promise." As he walked out the door, I realized that our story wasn't about the pain, the anger, or even the heartbreak. It was about love, the kind that forgives, waits, and ultimately heals. That morning, as the sun warmed my face, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, we would face the future together. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional true life stories that remind us, even after the hardest battles, love always finds its way back.